Hello, Telvani here, and I just wanted to share a few of my thoughts on the new 3.18 patch Sentinel League. Having played for a few days now, I can honestly say my feelings are rather mixed. But before we get into it, please hit that like button if you want to see more content from me, and feel free to subscribe to the channel, as it does help out quite a bit. So let's go ahead and start with the positives. The Sentinel mechanic itself is pretty decent. You get a lot more loot out of your maps for basically no extra work or any extra cost. In the very end game, the new Recombinator items will be setting a higher standard for mirror tier items. These things are absolutely broken, with enough RNG on your side. The new Atlas passives they added are quite strong as well, especially in the early game, before you can afford to start running Scarabs. And the addition of the new Uber bosses is quite an exciting shakeup for players wanting to do aspirational content, as they bring new challenges and increased rewards. So that's about as far as the benefits go for 3.18. And as you'll see in a moment, several of those positives come with a pretty significant negative. So what's wrong with patch 3.18? It sounded pretty OP. Well, it seems like GGG has sneakily brought out one of the biggest shakeups to the game in a long time. Probably one of the roughest patches for players since 3.15 Expedition, when they nerfed all of the support gems. However, GGG has gotten smarter about it, as the last time they tried this hard to bring the game in line with their vision, we saw a 25% reduction in player population. Alright, so let's take a closer look at these Recombinators. On the surface, they seem quite powerful, and they are, I'll admit that. They have the ability to create some absolutely broken items. However, in their current state, these things are destructive to the health of crafting in Path of Exile. I would argue Path of Exile's crafting in 3.17 was the best it had ever been, since maybe Harvest's glory days. We had the means to lock suffixes and prefixes, and very deterministically craft some of the best items in the game. With the introduction of Recombinators, we can now basically awaken orb any item's mods together, but there is a huge catch. We have no way of ensuring the mods we want survive onto the new item, and the Recombinator has the ability to sometimes act as a Chaos Orb instead. So you can combine two items with exactly the same mods on them, and end up with random garbage mods. This makes it very, very difficult to deterministically craft items, as you will probably need several dozen items that by themselves already are quite expensive to attempt combining them before you'll even get anything usable. This checks off one of GGG's goal for their vision, making crafting much more randomized. Alright, so let's take a look at those Uber bosses. These again are a double-edged sword, but they didn't have to be. By introducing these Uber bosses, they have effectively increased the difficulty if you want to do any of the regular bosses. The reason Uber Elder works is that in order to access it, you require fragments dropped from its non-Uber versions, the Shaper and the Elder. The Uber Elder also has an entirely different drop pool than either the Elder or the Shaper. This means that it is still profitable to run the non-Uber versions of these bosses. However, the new Uber versions of bosses are not as polished. They don't require you to farm the older versions of the bosses to gain access to them, but rather the entry cost to farm the Uber versions of bosses is the exact same cost as it is to fight the regular version of the bosses. And instead of a separate drop table like Uber Elder has, they share the same drop table, but have additional and better rewards than the normal variants. This means that after week 1, you'll basically need to farm the Uber versions of bosses if you want to fight bosses at all, as the regular versions will not be competitive in terms of profit, making the older versions effectively non-existent. This checks off another one of GGG's goal for their vision, making bosses harder across the board. Next up is one I'm sure we're all feeling and have all heard about, Rare and Magic Monster Rebalance. 3.18 was marketed as no balance changes. However, by adding Arch Nemesis mods to every single Rare and Magic monster, they have effectively reduced player power. And this is pretty bad for the longevity of the game, as it reduces build diversity, especially with some of the build-breaking mechanics these enemies can do, such as disabling Leech or Life Regen. Now more than ever, we are in a meta where you need to be able to one-shot the screen, or you're going to be having a very, very rough time. And by buffing the power of monsters, the pool of builds viable to do so have shrunk quite significantly. It's pretty ridiculous that an Essence monster is 3 times stronger than an endgame map boss. And no, GGG, this does not mean buff map bosses. Thank you. This has checked off another one of GGG's goal for their vision, making players forced to interact with rare monsters. Having played around with Headhunter for a day or so now, I can honestly say that I feel pretty lied to. I remember Chris has said time and time again in interviews, "We are not going to nerf Headhunter. It is an iconic item in the game, and I'm not going to allow anyone to nerf it." I have developers coming to me almost every single league saying, "We need to nerf Headhunter, we need to nerf Headhunter," but I tell them no. Headhunter is supposed to be this great belt that once you put it on, you basically won the game. Well, it looks like that is no longer the case. While the in-game description of Headhunter may not have changed, by changing all of the modifiers on rare monsters and capping the number of modifiers we can receive, Headhunter is definitely nerfed. It is still stronger than most items for the belt slot, but it is nowhere near as good as it used to be. And I can honestly say that my build in 3.18 with a Headhunter feels significantly weaker than it did in 3.17 at the same point in gear progression. So this has checked off another one of GGG's goal for their vision. Maybe even if it wasn't Chris's vision, nerfing Headhunter. Next up, GGG, as they said in the patch notes, changed the drop rate of Ashes of the Stars and Omniscience. These items were basically staples of most builds in 3.17, and most build guides recommended them for the endgame version of their builds. Unfortunately, it looks like these items might be unobtainable for a lot of the player base. I think I could see these items settling around 10 to 20x, but they could go even higher, which is more than quite a few players make in an entire league. Finally, Eldritch Altars. It definitely feels like Eldritch Altars got a pretty huge hit. I need to do more testing, but in my initial testing it feels like they either removed the ability for scarabs to be dropped, or have significantly reduced the rate at which they appear, since I haven't seen one yet in all of my mapping. They tried to soften the blow to this by adding the Stream of Consciousness notable, however I think it's still going to be a pretty big shock for most players after the feast of scarabs we had in 3.18. Alright, so I know I've been pretty down in this league, but all in all, I think this league will be amazing for streamers and students who can play 20 hours a day. However, for the players with less time on their hands, I think the game is going in a bad direction. Feel free to let me know if you think I've missed anything in the comments below. And I'd like to apologize for the lower quality of visual aids in this video. But it is still very early league, and I'm sure you all can understand. I'd like to get right back into gear progression. So, thank you for watching, good luck with your league, and I'll see you in the next one.